Hello, I am Ryan.
Hello, I am Amy. Welcome to Listen to English Podcast.
Today's episode is how to memorize English. Try this theory.
Yeah.
Um, have you ever felt like you just learned a new English word and you're really excited to use it, but then a few days later, poof, it completely vanishes from your brain?
Right.
It's so frustrating. Like all that effort just disappeared.
Yeah, you're definitely not alone.
Oh, really?
It appears that this is a very, very common experience for language learners, and there's actually a scientific reason why it happens.
Oh, it's interesting. So tell me, why do we forget words so easily? Is our brain just playing tricks on us?
Well, it's not exactly a trick, but it's more like your brain's way of managing information.
Okay.
Studies show that we can think of our brain like a big storage container.
Okay.
And you're constantly adding new things to it, new experiences, new facts, new words. But just like any storage container, there's limited space.
Right.
So your brain has to decide what to keep and what to let go of.
That makes sense. It's like trying to fit all your clothes into a suitcase that's already overflowing. Something has to go.
Yeah.
But how does our brain decide what information is valuable enough to keep?
Well, studies show that your brain prioritizes information that you use frequently.
Okay.
So think about it. If you use a specific English word every day, your brain recognizes that it's important and makes sure to keep it readily accessible. But if you encounter a new word and then you don't use it again for weeks, your brain assumes it's not that essential
Oh.
and might just let it fade away to make room for other things.
So it's all about repetition and consistent use.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But it also makes me a bit nervous because I know I'm guilty of learning new words and then not using them enough.
Right.
What can we do about that?
Well, that brings us to the concept of the forgetting curve, which really highlights the importance of reviewing information.
Okay.
Back in the late 1800s, a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus conducted research on memory. And he found that we forget a substantial amount of new information very quickly if we don't make an effort to retain it. In fact, it appears that within just 1 week, we can lose up to 80% of what we've learned.
Wow, 80%. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So if I learn 10 new words today,
Yeah.
does that mean I'll probably only remember 2 by next week? That's kind of depressing.
Yes, it can feel discouraging.
Yeah.
But the good news is that there's a way to combat this forgetting curve and improve our chances of remembering information for the long term.
Okay, what's that?
It's called spaced repetition.
Okay, spaced repetition. I've heard of that before. Was that where you review information at increasing intervals?
Exactly.
Oh, man.
Instead of trying to cram all the information in at once and then hoping it sticks, spaced repetition involves revisiting the material at strategic intervals to reinforce the learning.
Okay.
Let's say you learn a new English word today.
Okay.
With spaced repetition, you would review it again tomorrow, then maybe 2 days later, then a week later, and so on. Each time you revisit the word, it strengthens the connection in your brain and makes it less likely to fade away.
That sounds really promising, but it also seems like it could be a lot to keep track of.
Right.
How do people actually manage to implement spaced repetition in their learning routine?
There are a few different approaches you can take. It appears that one of the simplest and most accessible methods is using flashcards.
Okay. Flashcards.
Flashcards have been used for decades, and it is one of the most effective ways to memorize information. The act of actually writing down the English word on one side and then the definition or translation on the other side helps activate different parts of your brain,
Okay.
which aids in retention.
Yeah, I remember using flashcards when I was learning Spanish in high school.
Uh-huh.
It is a simple but effective method. Plus, you can easily carry them around with you and review them whenever you have a few spare minutes.
Exactly. And if you prefer a more digital approach, there are some fantastic apps out there.
Right.
Like Anki and Quizlet. These are specifically designed for spaced repetition learning
Okay.
and take all the guesswork out of scheduling your reviews.
Oh, right.
You simply input the information you want to learn, and the app will automatically prompt you to review it at the optimal intervals based on the forgetting curve algorithm.
That sounds really convenient. It's like having a personal tutor for your vocabulary.
It is very much like that.
Yeah.
Plus, many of these apps allow you to add images or audio or even create your own custom flashcards to make the learning process more engaging and tailored to your individual learning style.
Okay.
But keep in mind that spaced repetition isn't just for memorizing individual words.
Right.
It can be applied to various aspects of language learning,
Okay.
such as grammar rules or even more complex concepts.
I can see how that would be helpful. But how do you use spaced repetition for something like a grammar rule. It's
Right.
not like you can just put a rule on one side of a flashcard and the definition on the other.
That's true. You need to be a bit more creative with it. One effective way is to create flashcards with example sentences that illustrate the grammar rule in action.
Okay.
So, for example, if you're learning the present perfect tense, you could write a sentence like, I've been studying English for 3 years on one side of the card,
Uh-huh.
and then maybe a translation or brief explanation of the tense on the other side.
Right.
So this way, you're not just memorizing the rule itself, but also seeing how it's used in context.
That's a great tip.
Yeah.
I think using examples is so crucial when it comes to understanding grammar. It helps bring the rules to life. But besides flashcards and apps, are there any other ways we can reinforce our learning and combat that pesky forgetting curve?
Absolutely. One of the most powerful ways to make information stick is through real-life usage.
Okay.
The more you can actively use new words and grammar structures in conversations writing, or even just thinking to yourself in English, the better your chances of remembering them.
That makes perfect sense. It's like when you learn a new recipe. You can read it over and over, but until you actually get in the kitchen and start cooking, it's not going to truly sink in.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
By actively using the language, you're sending a clear signal to your brain that this information is important
Mm-hmm.
and worth holding on to. And this brings us to another important element of effective language learning, active learning.
I was hoping you'd bring that up. I've heard the term active learning before,
Yes.
but I'm not entirely sure what it means in practice.
Right.
It sounds like it's more than just passively reading or listening to English content.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
Active learning involves engaging with the material in a way that goes beyond passive consumption.
Right.
It's about doing something with the information to make it your own and truly understand it.
So it's about actively processing the information and making connections instead of just trying to absorb it like a sponge.
Exactly. Studies show that some great examples of active learning techniques include things like writing stories or articles, using the new words and grammar you've learned, recording yourself speaking in English, or even teaching the material to someone else.
Teaching someone else. That's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
I could see how that would force you to really understand the material inside and out. Plus, it would help you identify any gaps in your own understanding.
Exactly. And often the act of explaining something to someone else can solidify it in your own mind as well. Active learning techniques are more about using the language in a meaningful way rather than just memorizing isolated words and rules.
I completely agree, and I think that's what makes language learning so exciting. It's not just about acquiring knowledge, but about being able to actually use that knowledge to communicate and express yourself and connect with others. So it sounds like we've uncovered some really valuable strategies today for improving our memory and making language learning more effective. It appears that it all comes down to understanding how our brains work and then using techniques like spaced repetition and active learning to our advantage.
Absolutely. And the best part is that these strategies aren't limited to language learning. You can apply them to any area of your life where you want to enhance your memory and retention.
Oh, wow.
Whether you're trying to remember historical facts for a test, or you want to learn a new skill, or even just remember people's names, these techniques can make a significant difference.
That's encouraging to know because I think we all struggle with forgetting things from time to time. It's just part of being human.
Yeah.
But what's the key takeaway for our listeners who are specifically focused on improving their English skills? What advice would you give them based on what we've discussed today?
I would say the most important thing is to be patient with yourself. And remember that language learning is a journey, not a race. It's not about instant perfection, but about consistent effort and a willingness to experiment and find what works best for you.
Yeah.
Instead of feeling overwhelmed by the vastness of the English language, focus on building a solid foundation through regular practice and smart study techniques.
I love that. It's about focusing on the process and celebrating those small wins along the way.
Right.
And don't be afraid to try different approaches, whether it's flashcards, apps, real-life conversations, or a combination of methods. The key is to make learning an active and engaging experience.
Exactly. It appears that many people make the mistake of passively consuming information and hoping it'll magically stick in their brains, but we've learned today that that's not how our brains work. We need to be more proactive and intentional about our learning strategies.
So instead of just hoping for the best, we need to be actively involved in shaping our own learning experience.
Yeah.
We need to give our brains the right tools and guidance to make that information stick.
Precisely. Our brains are incredible learning machines, but they need our help by understanding how memory works And using strategies like spaced repetition and active learning, we can unlock our brain's full potential and achieve our language learning goals.
Well said. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I feel like I've gained some valuable insights into how I can improve my own learning process,
Good.
not just for English, but for anything I want to learn.
Right.
So before we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to leave our listeners with?
I would like to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question to ponder. What's one new way you can incorporate spaced repetition or active learning into your English studies this week? It could be anything from trying out a new flashcard app to committing to writing a short paragraph in English every day.
I love that challenge. It's all about taking action and experimenting to see what works best for you. So to everyone listening, I encourage you to give these techniques a try and see how they can transform your language learning journey. Thanks for joining us on the show today, and we'll see you next time for another insightful exploration into the world of language learning.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. It really helps our channel grow and reach more English learners like you. By subscribing, you'll never miss a new episode, and by liking the video, you're letting us know you want more helpful content. Thank you for your support. It means so much to us.